Yeah. So, any dedications?
Listen, my track record of wishing you well hasn't worked for any of you. I'm going to keep quiet at this point.
I've got a dedication, New York, New York. Can you sing that?
Okay.
Okay. So, continuing with the theme of adding water to cholent or foods that was cooked before Shabbos for Shabbos day. If it is impractical to lift and hold the cholent pot, is it permitted to pour boiling water directly from the urn or the kettle into the pot while it's left sitting on the properly covered heat source? And the answer is yes, it is permitted to leave the cholent on a properly covered heat source and pour boiling water directly from the urn or kettle into the pot, provided that the water is poured into the pot slowly and gently. Note, and there's a note here, adding water to the cholent using this method of allowing the pot to remain on the heat source does not obviate the necessity of properly covering the heat source. If the heat source is not properly covered, then water may not be added under any circumstances. Okay, another question here, then we'll finish, which is the final question. Okay, the question is, when is it impractical to pour water directly from the urn or kettle into the pot? Is it permitted to pour boiling water from the urn or kettle into a cup or thermos and then pour from the cup into the pot? And the answer is the option is subject to debate among the poskim, permitted by some and frowned upon by others. Certainly, when no other option is available, or if one is concerned about rendering his urn fleshig, one may rely on the lenient views. A preferred alternative would be to insert a parav ladle into the urn while it is on the fire. Leave it in for several seconds, then ladle the water into the pot. This option is permitted l'chadchila. And a note here, water from the Shabbos urn often doesn't reach the boiling point of 212 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
When adding a boiling cholent, however, the water will get boiled. A violation of the prohibited biblical labor of cooking, according to some poskim. To satisfy the more stringent opinion, one must ascertain that the temperature of the water in the urn reaches the boiling point before adding it to the cholent. At the very least, one must ascertain that the water temperature reaches 175 degrees Fahrenheit, or else the water may not be added. If, however, the water previously reached 212 or 175 degrees Fahrenheit, it is permitted to pour it into the cholent, even though at the moment it has cooled off a bit. Okay.
So what I'm going to do is, in addition to this, I'm just going to share some link resources with you guys. I'm going to send another link. And the reason
1 second, sorry.
Okay. Do you need some tissues, Kev?
I've got a few here.
Okay.
I may have to go get, so I'll let you know.
Problem. So what I want to do is I want to share a few link resources with you guys, and then I'll send them on the Bava Kamma group. And it's just going to help you with if you get unstuck with certain things. And then I'm going to send a new link for the share, because it's just going to be easier to have a solid session. I'm not going to use that full new link, but it just would be helpful. So I'm going to share my screen now and just give me 1 second, guys. Okay. All right. Can you see the screen here?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to send you guys now. Rabbi Moshe Elephant did speak in South Africa, and Rav Simcha Steinhauer often quotes him in the Gemara Shir, and he's extremely good. He's a little bit above my level, not a little bit, a heck of a lot above my level. He's brilliant, but the issue is my Aramaic and Hebrew knowledge is very limited. So I prefer a share where I understand what the person is saying, not because he's getting complicated, but because my knowledge is limited. Does that make sense, guys? So it's just a resource that I'm going to send you. Then one of the other resources, which is easy, is dafyomi.co.il. Now, this sort of resource is used by Rabbi Aran Moshe Cohen, because you're able to test yourself in the daf. So it's got a point-by-point system, which I'm going to show you now. That I use often. That's my most common. This tells you where the halacha is derived from that particular daf, which is very interesting. That's a question and answer review, and you get grilled to pieces, and you get to learn the Tosfots, etc. You can't be able to do everything here. But for sure, the point for point is something that I really find very handy. Just give me 1 sec. Oh gosh, just hang on. This is the point for point. I think I've told you about this before, and in fact, I think who also showed me about this was Arthur. Now, what I like about this point by point is if you're trying to look at 4 or 5 dafs before and after, just to get a bit of a flow and context backwards and forwards, it gives you a bullet point to the various sections. As you can see on all these resources, we're on the 70th daf. As you can see, oh dear. Am I still sharing my screen with you guys?
No, you lost it.
Wonderful. Just hang on a second. It's a bit irritating because it actually moves things around. Okay, this is a little bit easier. All right. So that is the point by point you see here. That's exactly what I pointed to there. That's probably the most common resource I learned. The halacha, not really so much, but it's interesting to go through that. That's based on the Rambam. As far as questions and answers, I don't think you guys really need to use that. If you have a look here at Shas Illuminated, there are rabbis that give shirim on on the particular daf. What I like, if you look at Yitzchak Bohem, he gives you quick highlights of the daf or key topics of the daf. That's Rabbi Ari Carlson. So those two are more handy because it just gives you a bit of a understanding of the daf. I wouldn't suggest the top two. In terms of the Rishonim and Achronim, that would leave me a little confused. It's just too much. But quick highlights or notes on the key topics, that's decent. Rabbi Aran Cohen is my favorite because he's got a great sense of humor, funnier than me, more knowledgeable than me. And Arthur will testify to the fact that Rabbi Aran Cohen, you can listen to in the background, and it's very, very funny. I could always send you the links. He's very good. And I'll tell you why I like this live daf is because if you have a look, if you have it live daf, I like visuals. Sometimes the problem is if I'm not reading and I'm only listening to audio, my mind wanders. If my mind wanders for a sec and I'm in the kitchen, I've got to run back and pause and replay. Now, it might not happen to you guys. I don't know if I've got attention deficit disorder or something. But when I'm seeing a person's videos, that's why I was encouraging Rabbi Cohen during lockdown to make videos. But he's not doing it anymore. He's gone back to the audio because it just takes too much bandwidth. But I like to see it. And this is a very quick 35-minute review of the daf that I find pretty good. And then Daf HaChaim is probably one of my favorite resources in terms of charts, etc. There's one major drawback, and that drawback is a lot of it's in Hebrew and Aramaic, which actually drives me crazy because the charts here are in Hebrew and Aramaic. Gavin and I were battling with this a bit. I love the idea of a daf intro, quick, 2 minutes, a daf review of 7 minutes. That concept is amazing. The charts is amazing. But I just figure the charts are not in English and I battle a little bit with my limitation. And then Kevin, I need to stand corrected. I thought he got the Koran. He actually got the Schottenstein. So well done. I really, really appreciate that. And then, sorry guys, yesterday I shared my PDF instead of my JPEG, and that's why the writing was so small. So apologies for that. So I'm going to send a new link now, and I'm going to send these links. Now, I'm not suggesting that you guys do any of this stuff. These are just resources that you can take at your leisure. But I think the bottom line of the daf is that since you've got the Schottenstein, Kev, you don't have time to do the notes. You don't need to do the notes. If you just read the daf, and the daf to read on its own can take 15, 20 minutes without all the notes and everything else. All you do is you get a general understanding of the concept conveyed. And if you're able to do that on a Saturday before the daf, and you know we're on the 70th daf, then you've got a general idea of what the issues are at hand. So that kind of helps quite a lot. You don't have to go through all the notes, etc., because the notes need to be cross-referenced and checked, and you can. But all I'm saying is if you just read the big text on the Schottenstein, I bought it for you just to make your life a little bit easier so that even when you're exhausted, it's just going to give you that added. All right. So what I want to do is I want Kevin just to read from the word if until the word payment here, the Mishnah.
Hold on a sec. If there.
Yeah.
Kanav. If the fact that one stole an ox or
No,
sheep.
just Kev, just slow it down. Just read it clearly from the beginning of the Mishnah up until this first paragraph.
If the fact that one stole an ox or a sheep was established by the testimony of two witnesses, and the fact that he then slaughtered or sold the stolen animal was established by their testimony as well, or by the testimony of two other witnesses, he pays a fourfold or fivefold payment.
Excellent. So what the first part of the Gemara is going to discuss is that does it have to be the same set of witnesses that witnessed the theft of the ox or the sheep compared to a different set of witnesses that might have viewed the slaughter or sale of the stolen animal? Because generally you might realistically not have the same set of witnesses that would be lucky enough to view not only the theft but the slaughter or sale of the animal. So can it be two separate sets of witnesses in order to make sure that the court establishes that the thief pays the four or fivefold payment? That's what we're dealing with at the moment. So why would it even be a discussion? So in summary, because I was idiotic enough not to record, and I'm just checking that this in fact is recording. It is recording. Excellent. What the Gemara addresses is that the Mishnah is ruling that if two witnesses testify to the theft and two other witnesses testify to the slaughter or sale, the thief is liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. So we say, look, let us see that our Mishnah does not accord with Rabbi Akiva. For if you say that it does accord with Rabbi Akiva, we've learned that Rabbi Akiva says when the Torah says that witnesses shall establish a matter, it implies but not half a matter. So that is, guys, that the testimony is unacceptable unless it establishes a complete matter. So what we're saying is that Rabbi Akiva learns from Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 15, that it states, according to two witnesses, shall, etc., shall a matter be established. Okay, which means you need the same set of witnesses. So Rabbi Akiva maintains that the testimony which is relevant only in conjunction with the testimony of other witnesses is not valid at all. So in other words, it would seem that if you've got a first set of witnesses that view the theft of the animal and a separate set of witnesses that view the slaughter or sale of the animal, it's not valid, based on how he reads this pasuk. And what do we say that you find an application as far as that's concerned? Well, it was taught in a brisa. Rav Yossi said, when Father Chalafta went to Rav Yochanan, ben Nuri to study Torah because his father was Khalafa, or as others reported, when Rav Yochanan ben Nuri went to father Khalafta to study Torah, they discussed this very issue. So he said to him, look, we're going to look at a case in Bava Basra in the 28th daf, and the Mishnah there teaches that if witnesses testify that a person occupies a property, and they're known to have belonged to another person, and this new person occupies the property for 3 years, and the original owner did not contest his occupancy in all this time, guys, in all these 3 years. The occupant then establishes a presumption of title, known as a chazaka. So in other words, the occupant can claim that he purchased the field or the apartment, even though he can't produce a deed or witnesses attesting to the sale, because as we said, the witnesses could have died, they could have moved to a different town, the deed could have got water damage. So a person is not expected to keep deeds for longer than 3 years. So what we're basically saying is that if there's no drama in the 3 years that he was an occupant in the premises, and with this law of chazaka, being that he becomes a owner in the premises, if it's not disputed, it's highly unlikely that the original owner would let it go for 3 years because he knows he's going to lose his property. So we're saying, all right, in this particular case, suppose an occupant uses a property for 3 years, right? But you've got 3 different sets of witnesses. So the first year, there's the first set of witnesses. The second year, you get another 2 different witnesses. And the third year, you have even another 2 witnesses that had never been in the 2 previous years. So what's the law? So in other words, can 3 testimonies of separate witnesses, 3 sets of 2 witnesses be combined to establish a chazaka or not? So he replied to them, this is a chazaka as the testimonies can be combined. Okay, so the question is that, well, there's no question, the rabbis accepted that it could be different witnesses. So the question was, what does Rabbi Akiva say on this matter? Because he differs in this matter. For Rabbi Akiva was one to say, when the Torah says that witnesses shall establish a matter, it implies but not half a matter. In other words, that testimony is unacceptable unless it establishes a complete matter. So accordingly, none of the 3 sets of witnesses on their own can establish the matter. And since you need 3 separate sets of witnesses, their testimony is unacceptable according to Rabbi Akiva. Now, in the case of our Mishnah, the one that Kevin read, 2 testimonies are necessary for the 4-fold or 5-fold penalty to apply. Arthur, what are the 2 different testimonies that you'd have in our Mishnah? Arthur, you conveniently disappeared.
Gavin can say it or I'll say it. Gavin,
All right,
you try first.
I promise you I won't ask you if you come back on the screen.
He's probably busy doing something with the family. Gavin will answer it or I'll answer it.
Okay, you answered, Kev.
Me? Gavin, don't you want to go? Okay. So the testimony has to be to the initial theft and to either the slaughter or the sale.
Excellent, perfect. So you need there's two periods of time. One when the actual theft took place, and the second one at the point where the thief sold or slaughtered the animal. Now, it's unlikely, as we established, that it's going to be the same set of witnesses. It's bizarre that it would be. It's very unlikely. So we're saying, if we learned what we learned in Bava Basra and Rabbi Akiva's opinion, obviously in our Mishnah, he wouldn't see the testimony of 2 different sets of witnesses valid unless it was the same set of witnesses. And how would he enforce the 4 or 5-fold payment? Would he even consider it a matter? So we're saying it obviously doesn't accord with Rabbi Akiva. And the Gemara says, hang on a second. In fact, he can actually accord with our Mishnah. What did Abaya say? Do you remember, Kevin, or must I repeat it?
About the the young girl who's there.
No,
There'll just
not
be
the
proof.
young girl. Not the young girl.
No, okay.
Gavin, what did Abaya say?
Can't remember.
Okay, no problem. So let me just go through it for a minute or two. So Abaya said you can even say that the Mishnah accords with Rabbi Akiva, for does not Rabbi Akiva for not concede where two witnesses testify that a man betrothed a woman, and two other witnesses testify that another man cohabited with her, and that she is therefore liable to death penalty for committing adultery. That although the witnesses to the cohabitation require the testimony of the witnesses to the betrothal in order for their testimony to be effective, since the witnesses to the betrothal do not require the testimony of the witnesses to the cohabitation for their testimony to be effective, we call it, even the second testimony, a complete matter. So even Rabbi Akiva concedes to this. Therefore, here too, although the witnesses to the slaughter require the testimony of the witnesses to the theft in order for their testimony to be effective, since the witnesses to the theft do not require the testimony of the witnesses to the slaughter for their testimony to be effective, we call it, even the second testimony, a complete matter. So all it's saying is as follows, is in order to give a woman the death penalty for adultery, we have to first establish that she's married. If this woman that was found cohabiting with a man was not legally married and she's a single woman, we do not give her the death penalty because a man can marry more than one woman. So if she's asked as a single woman, what did you do? She'd say, listen, he was going to make an honest woman out of me. We committed beer with the intent to get married. He has commitment issues and I'm waiting for my ring. Okay, she doesn't get the death penalty. She's a single woman. But if it's established through a separate set of witnesses that in fact she's married, so they go back and they say, listen, there were two people that were witnesses at a ketubah. In that particular case, her goose is cooked, because if she cohabits with another man, she gets the death penalty. So, in other words, the adultery case hinges upon the fact that we first prove with two sets of witnesses that she's married, and therefore the second set of witnesses that saw her in a different town having an affair, because she's not going to commit the Aveira where she got married because it's too risky. So she got married in Johannesburg, and there are two separate sets that saw her in Camps Bay in one of the apartments having an affair with a married man, and she's married, or he's single, whatever the case may be. So if the second set of witnesses see the cohabitation, in order to give her the death penalty, you first need the first set of witnesses to prove she's married. So the second set of witnesses about the cohabitation only is effective in a death penalty if you've got the first set of witnesses proving that in fact she's married. It doesn't have to be the same set of witnesses. Even Rabbi Akiva agrees. Okay? Now, in our particular case, what we're saying is, according to Abaya, Rabbi Akiva would agree that the first thing you have to establish is the theft. And if those sets of witnesses are not the same sets of witnesses that established the thief selling or slaughtering the animal, it's okay. He still pays the 4 or 5-fold, providing you've got the testimony of the first witnesses that established the matter of thievery. Otherwise, it could be his own animal he's selling or slaughtering. So in this case, Abaya says, Rabbi Akiva wouldn't disagree. So we're saying, okay, in the case in Bava Basra, in the 28th daf, Rabbi Akiva doesn't agree with regards to the witnesses of the chazaka to establish 3 years of occupancy in a property. It has to be the same set of witnesses. But in this case, Abaya said he would agree the same as the case with a married woman that commits adultery, that you could have two sets of witnesses. So we're saying fine. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva can accord with this Mishnah. So then the question comes up, is obviously that verse in Deuteronomy which basically states that in Devarim chapter 19, verse 15, according to two witnesses, etc., shall a matter be established, that the rabbis would need a case where this becomes valid. In other words, what's the classic case that you need a single set of witnesses? Because they obviously do something with this pasuk. Does that make sense, guys, the question? So now we're going to learn the classic case. Kev, have I got you with me up until
no. But just going back a few steps. If they're witnesses to adultery, does it mean they witnessed someone in private, a married woman in private with a man? Is that what they mean? Or would they actually witness the actual act?
Yeah, in fact, it's actually clear that they have to witness. It's almost described as a brush and nail polish. They've actually got this, I can't be more graphic than that. They have to witness it. Now, the likelihood of that happening is unlikely. I mean, they didn't have binoculars, and the woman wouldn't have had guys around watching the intercourse holding up rate cards. 10 out of 10, 5 out of 10. It's pretty unlikely.
Sorry about that, yeah.
Okay, so I'm saying that's fine. But now what we want to establish, so we can already establish that Rabbi Akiva, in our case, would see it as a similar case with a married woman. So it doesn't mean he disagrees with our Mishnah. We've established that. But what we want to know is that pasuk in Deuteronomy, what is the rabbi's classic case where they do not allow two separate sets of witnesses? That's what we want to establish now, Kevin. We want to establish what the rabbis do with that pasuk. Have I got you? If I don't have you, then you need to just do a review in your Gemara. You just need to go on. I'm sure you guys also want to leave. So we're saying, look, all right, if you look at the classical case, we're saying, look, we're talking about now that a young girl has to be considered 12 years old and sexually mature in order for her to have considered committing adultery. Because even if she's married legally and she hasn't reached sexual maturity, if she is under 12 years old or not sexually mature, she hasn't committed adultery. That's the bottom line. So, again, she can biblically get into a recognized marriage if her father makes sure she's married, whether or not she hits sexual maturity or not. Now, if she's sexually mature and a woman in her 20s, which in those days was like on the shelf, and like old, etc., whatever, and the father hadn't got her married, even though she's sexually mature, she ain't married. So we're talking about here, number one, a girl that doesn't have a father. Number two, a girl enters a stage of narus, which is a state of adulthood. So what's a state of adulthood? Sexual maturity. She has to have grown at least 2 pubic hairs, and she has to have reached the age of 12. So when we're establishing the fact that she could commit adultery, generally to establish her sexual maturity, you can get one witness. Say, for example, Kevin, where at the time she gets married, perhaps, or whatever, medical reasons. But as far as a death penalty case is concerned, to establish her sexual maturity, you definitely need 2 witnesses. There's no doubt we look at everything in the favor to get off the death penalty. So it doesn't suffice to have 1 witness. Okay? So what happens is this is discussed in Nida I'm not going to go through the Gemara in Nida. I'm just going to actually just tell you. So it comes to exclude the case in which 2 witnesses testify to establish the adult status of a girl, and 1 witness says, I observed 1 hair on her back, and 1 witness says, I've observed 1 hair on her abdomen. Now, guys, we're using this as a euphemism. When we say 1 hair on her back, we mean from the rear area where we don't think it's a rabbi there that's Googling at this naked 12-year-old. Believe me. It's a female that's looking from the rear end to see that there is a pubic hair that's developed, and one that's looking at the abdomen side, the frontal area, to see that a pubic hair is developed. So if you have two separate witnesses, and one witness only saw one pubic hair in the front, and you've got a separate witness that saw a pubic hair in the back. Okay, that's a bit of a problem. Okay, so because if each witness was only able to testify to with respect to one pubic hair, then it's not good enough to establish that she's an adult. In other words, let's take the worst case scenario. Even in a case where one witness would have sufficed, if one witness viewed one pubic hair and one witness viewed another, but from opposite ends, that's not one witness viewing two pubic hairs. So even in the lightest case, you would need one witness viewing two pubic hairs for sexual maturity, not one. So if you have one witness viewing one pubic hair from the front and one from the rear, that's not considered even acceptable for one witness, because the one witness would have to view two pubic hairs. So again, that's not acceptable in and of itself. Okay? So the Gemara rejects the answer and says we do not need the exposition of matter, but not half a matter to exclude this case. For such testimony is not only half a matter, but it's also half a necessary testimony, for we only have one witness testifying to the presence of each hair. So it's saying that obviously in that case, we're not even talking that extreme, because that's not enough to even establish one witness, not enough to, never mind two. So we're saying, okay, so it's not that case. We're saying that, let's just say it's one witness that has viewed two pubic hairs, okay? And then there's a separate witness that's viewed two pubic hairs. So each one on their own would view two pubic hairs. Do you get what I'm saying? In that particular case, there's also a problem, okay? So in other words, the Gemara is rephrasing the answer. Rather, according to the rabbis, the exposition of matter, but not half a matter, comes to exclude the case in which two witnesses say, we observed one hair on the back, and another two witnesses that say we observed one hair on the abdomen. These, the said to testify to observing one hair on the back, say that she is minor, and these who testify observing one hair on the abdomen say that she's a minor. Okay, so I'll explain what we basically say. So, with respect to rendering her an adult, each testimony is half a matter, and obviously excludes the case where one witness only views a single pubic hair. Okay, but what we are saying is here, you've got two witnesses that see her from the front, and they only observe one pubic hair in the front. She's got one in the front, and two separate witnesses that observe that she's got a separate pubic hair in the back. They got two different witnesses, maybe different at different times or whatever the case may be. That's still not enough to convict her, because each witness has to observe two pubic hairs. If two witnesses only observe one pubic hair, it's not enough. Never mind one witness observing one pubic hair. So in that case, what you would ideally need is two witnesses observing two pubic hairs. It's no good two witnesses observing one pubic hair alone in the front. She's got no other pubic hairs, and a different set observe a pubic hair from behind, or a hair on maybe towards the anal area, whatever the case may be, at the back, because they can't view both, because obviously by the time they walk around, you can't see both. So that's not enough, because if two witnesses can only say they observed one hair, she's legally a minor. So therefore, you would have to have the two witnesses observing two hairs. I don't know if I'm making sense to you guys. Please tell me.
No, it's clear. For me, it's clear.
Okay. So that's
clear. At the same time.
At the same time, correct. So that's a case where the rabbis would say, listen, it's not good enough. Because if the two witnesses only could see one hair from the front, and they don't have a full peripheral vision, and you need another two to view a single pubic hair from the back, you don't put their testimonies together and say she is an adult. even though she technically has 2 pubic hairs, because 2 witnesses can only observe 1. She's legally a minor, and therefore she gets off the death penalty. Now, it's different in our particular case, so that's even where the rabbis agree. But it's different to the 3-year chazaka of the property, because the occupation of the property for 1 year, in essence, is actually establishing the act of ownership. And it's the beginning of the process. So if it endures for 3 years without the owner complaining, ownership would be established. So although 3 years are necessary to establish a chazaka, each individual testimony alone doesn't effect a change in the property status. But when they're combined, it's still an act of chazaka. Here, even if you combine them, it doesn't matter, because 2 sets saw one and 2 sets saw another, which means each one only saw that she's a minor because they only observed 1. So you don't put that together and say 2 single ones become 2, and therefore she's tried as an adult. That's why the 2 cases are not analogous, and that's how the rabbis would see it in this case. So this is where they say that it's got to be the same 2 witnesses. That if there's another set and they see 1, it's not good enough. You okay?
So if you relate it, you go back to the original situation where the 2 witnesses witness the theft and then the sale. That's a complete. Is it like that's what it's saying?
No, that's not what it's saying. Here, in the case of a married woman, and the case of our Mishnah, we have no problem. We have no problem. This is a separate issue. This is an issue where even the rabbis agree that you'd have to have the same set of witnesses observing 2 pubic hairs, not one set of witnesses, two people observing 1 pubic hair from the front. She's got nothing else in the front, and a separate set observing 1 pubic hair from the rear, because together you can't say it equals 2 pubic hairs, therefore she's an adult and she's tried as an adult as committing an affair because she's sexually mature and gets the death penalty. No, because you can't combine their testimonies. That's what the rabbis are saying in this case, because peripherally you can only see 1 at a time.
So they would have to stand like at an angle to see both.
No, you can't, because if a young girl's like this, right, and there's only 1 in the rear and 1 in the front, and they're not sticking out, for example, and she'd have to, I'm not being crude, either bend over or bend backwards or whatever.
Yeah.
Then there's no peripheral vision, but you can't say that just because the 2 witnesses view the one and 2 witnesses view the other, you add them together and say they're 2 pubic hairs and try as an adult. And I'm assuming that they say this because the argument in Gemara Nidach and the 52nd daf say that the pubic hairs have to generally grow together to prove sexual maturity. The reason being is that they don't want to give this woman a death penalty, this young girl, for nothing. So technically what could happen, Kevin's right, is that the 2 sets of witnesses observe the back, then they come and observe the front and write their testimony. But the discussion in Nida is that the 2 pubic hairs have to be for sexual maturity. There's got to be a reasonable amount. It can't be a single hair, because a single hair could be an anomaly. There's some girls with facial hair, or some people that have hair in the knuckles, as the Gemara says, and it's not indicative of sexual maturity necessarily. So 1 pubic hair isn't anything more than a mole. It could be a mole. All right, look, guys, bottom line is we don't want to give unnecessary death penalties.
So they're trying to really make it difficult to
they want to make
give it the benefit of the doubt.
And correct, and therefore you would need 1 set of witnesses to view the 2 pubic hairs in order to try her as an adult. Absolutely.
So why can't one set of 2 witnesses who viewing it and giving test before they give testimony, the one will check from the front, the other one will check from but then they'll swap and then they'll confirm.
No, you can't do that because you have to have 2 witnesses viewing the same thing together.
Okay.
So even if you take your case and they view from behind, they both say, established 1, cool. Let's go to the other end and establish another one, cool. You can't do that because they've got to be witnessed together. They've got to be seen together.
Yes,
you can't have it in a pattern of time to see 1 and then a later one, because you're talking about 2 different events of viewing, like you're viewing a slaughter and a theft and then a slaughter, or you're viewing, for example, a a marriage, ketubah, and then an adultery or whatever, etc. It's got to be within the same period of time. If it's two different periods of time, our Mishnah and the one with a married woman, who etc., is agreed by both Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis. The one in Bava Basra in the 28th daf is agreed by the rabbis, but not Rabbi Akiva. And this one with the underage girl, is she committing adultery or not, is not even agreed by the rabbis. Never mind Rabbi Akiva. That's all. All right, guys, I'm sure I've put you through the hoops. It's done.
Well done.
What about tomorrow?
Well, aren't you guys going on a jaw tomorrow?
No, I'm not going to go if I've got a running nose. Arthur's going somewhere. Arthur?
Yeah, I'm going to.
What time will you be back, though, Arthur?
I don't know.
See, I may go. I also may not know.
Do you want to leave it for tomorrow so that you guys can just actually feel better? Because nothing's being absorbed if all of you are not feeling well.
Well, you did extra tonight, so maybe that.
Yeah. It counts. Good, you guys are off the hook. Counts. It counts. No, it does. It counts. You guys were good sports.
All right. Thank you. It gives us a chance to recover. I agree, because we were bad. We haven't recovered.
No, but Gavin, we.